Alif Lam Mim, only 3 letters. Islamic scholars have discussed them for centuries. Great awliya like Ibn Arabi said that very special secrets are hidden here. Between Asr and Maghrib there is a hidden door, and the key to that door is hidden in Surah Al-Baqarah. Inside it is Ayat al-Kursi, a verse that shakes the heavens and the earth. Inside it is Aman al-Rasul, a gift from the Miraj full of deep secrets. Surah Al-Baqarah is central to Islam. It carries the codes of the Prophet ﷺ life in Medina. It is powerful against magic, the evil eye, and illness. When it is recited, devils leave the house. For the one who asks, Allah gives what He wills. And this surah is a great source of hope for everyone who fears the grave. You are watching Religious Story TV. We are continuing our series on the surahs of the Quran. To not miss this series, please subscribe, leave a comment, and like the video. With your support, we can reach many more brothers and sisters. If you are ready, let's begin. As evening fell over the streets of Medina, a new voice began to rise. The Prophet was sitting with his companions, reciting newly revealed verses. His voice echoed through the narrow streets of Medina. Alif Lam Mim. This was not an ordinary sound. Arabic was their language. They understood every word, every letter and every sound went straight into their minds. But these 3 letters were different. The Jewish scholars of Medina had been teaching in synagogues for many years. For generations, they had taught the Torah. Their hands were dark with ink from writing books page after page. Because of this, the Quran called them ahbar, people who lived with ink. And now that unlettered prophet, a man who could not read or write, was speaking about letters, Alif Lam Mim. They were only 3 letters, but they created shock among the educated people of Medina. Because there was only one way to know letters, learning to read. But these were not letters learned through worldly knowledge. There were great secrets behind them. Whispers spread through the marketplace of Medina. Wait a moment, some people said. Who taught him the letters? We thought he was unlettered. He had not studied with rabbis or priests. He had received no education at all. He was untouched by schooling, like a newborn child. But now, some of the Jewish scholars began to search through their old books. Maybe there was a clue there. Maybe these letters had a meaning in the Torah, maybe a hidden code, maybe a sign. But they found nothing. Those letters stood there like a door. Even today, these letters are still seen as encoded. We will soon come to the very interesting explanations of different Islamic scholars. But now let us continue the story and read the verses that come after this coded verse, so we can understand the connection between them. The Prophet continued to recite, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. That book, there is no doubt in it. It is guidance for the mindful. It was as if Allah was saying, you were curious about the letters. Now let me introduce the book to you. That is the book. Here there was a subtle detail. Allah did not say, this book, He said, that book. In Arabic, words of distance are not chosen randomly. You say this for what is near. You say that for what is far. This is not just language, it is a map of the mind. Allah drew this map from the very beginning. What you hear is near, but where it is written is far. Even though the Quran is recited here, that book is actually in Lawh al-Mahfuz, far away, unchangeable, cannot be erased, cannot be rewritten, as if carved into stone. And at this point, the listener realizes something. This speech is not random. These words are not improvised. This message is coming from somewhere, and we are only at the beginning. Another shockwave followed. The Prophet did not yet have a physical book in his hands. No one had ever seen him reading anything, because he could not read. But now, words were flowing from his lips as if he were reading from an invisible book. And those words, even the most educated people in Medina had never spoken like this. Arabs were proud of their language. They boasted about their greatest poets and most eloquent speakers. They looked down on anyone who could not speak well. In any society, the question, who knows, slowly becomes the question, who rules? Whoever controls knowledge, whoever controls meaning, controls society. Until that day, the knowledge of Medina was in certain hands, the hands of rabbis and scholars. From the very first step, the Quran said, "The authority of this book is not in your hands." That is why the Quran did not only say the book. When it said, "There is no doubt in this book," it was really saying, this book has the power to remove doubt from the inside. So who are the Muttaqin mentioned at the end of the verse in the sentence, "Guidance is for the Muttaqin"? When we translate it into English, it means those who protect themselves, or those who are careful and mindful. At this point, a new tension is born in the listener's heart. Am I one of the Muttaqin? Will I be able to receive something from this book? The Quran does not say something like those who are protecting themselves as a temporary action. Instead, by saying Muttaqin, it points to a timeless group. They existed in the past, they exist now, and they will exist in the future. This is a door of hope, because some people fall into this illness. There were good people before, there are none now. The Quran breaks this idea on its very first page. People of Taqwa will exist until the day of judgment. But Taqwa here does not mean only a religious Muslim. The door the Quran opens is wider than that, because one side of Taqwa can exist even before faith. A person tries to protect themselves from evil, stays away from lies, avoids injustice, and their heart is still facing a clean direction. That is why the Quran in Medina does not speak only to Muslims. It also speaks to Jews and Christians, because they are listening, they understand, they are also included in this address. Everyone who comes trying to save themselves from evil, Christian, Jew, agnostic, atheist, whoever they may be, will find guidance in this book. In reality, the door is opened for all of them. The invitation is made. Allah opened this door to the entire community of Medina and through it to the whole world. The Prophet was still new in Medina. Yet from the moment he arrived, the city took on a structure it had never had before. Muslims, Jews, and Arab polytheists were living together. Agreements were made between them. An alliance was formed to defend the city of Medina together. For the Muslims, this was a new life. In Mecca, they had been a small group, oppressed, pushed out, seen as rebels or as a threat to society. But in Medina, they had become a community. A great peace had entered the borders of Medina. Islam had stopped the tribal conflicts, and it was in this atmosphere that the verses of Surah Al-Baqarah began to be revealed. This surah spread across almost the entire life of the Prophet in Medina. Let us continue with verse 3. الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ وَيُقِيمُونَ الصَّلَاةَ وَمِمَّا رَزَقْنَهُمْ يُنْفِقُونَ. Those who believe in the unseen establish the prayer and spend from what we have provided for them. Allah defined the very first and most basic quality of the people of Taqwa as belief in the unseen. The word Gaib represents a vast world beyond the five senses, a world that cannot be tested in laboratories, but whose presence is deeply felt in the heart. Angels, the hereafter, secrets revealed through revelation, and most importantly, the essence of Allah. If a person believes only in what they see, they are trapped inside their biological limits. But the one who believes in the unseen realizes that the visible universe is only a thin shell, and that the real truth is hidden behind this veil. Belief in the unseen is, in reality, a test of trust and surrender. When the first Muslims of Medina walked toward the dusty field of Badr, or when they were shaken by the pain of Uhud, they felt not only the enemy in front of them, but also the unseen armies beside them and the promised paradise ahead of them. This is not where reason ends, but where a higher reason begins. The believer does not trust their limited vision, they trust Allah's infinite knowledge. And this trust becomes the strongest armor against the uncertainties and inner crises of the modern world. But if belief in the unseen stayed only as a mental idea, it would remain nothing more than philosophy. Allah seals this abstract belief immediately with a clear action, and they establish the prayer. Notice carefully, Allah does not say, they pray. He says, they establish the prayer. This means raising it like a structure, placing it at the center of life. Prayer is the bridge between the unseen and the visible world. A person who believes in the unseen stands before that unseen presence 5 times a day. Before finishing this verse about the unseen, it is the right moment to return to the meaning of Alif Lam Mim. Alif Lam Mim. What did Islamic scholars say about these letters? Great figures such as Ibn Arabi and Imam Rabbani and many other scholars spoke about them. There are more than 20 interpretations, but most opinions gather around a few main approaches. Even though these letters have been discussed for centuries, there is no single agreed interpretation. Still, there are some general views. The first view: the true meaning of these letters is known only to Allah. This view has been strong since the time of the companions. Reports attributed to Abu Bakr, Umar ibn al-Khattab, and Ali ibn Abi Talib say that the Huruf al-Muqatta'at should be accepted without explanation. In other words, they are divine signs whose meaning is deliberately hidden. The second strong view: these letters point to the miraculous nature of the Quran. According to this view, letters like Alif, Lam, and Mim are ordinary letters used daily by the Arabs. With these letters, the Quran makes a declaration from the very beginning. This Quran is made from the same letters you see and use every day. You know these letters. So if you are able, then produce a book like it, made from these same letters. This was a direct challenge, and it still stands. The third approach says that these letters carry symbolic or sign-based meanings. Some scholars connected Alif to the oneness of Allah, Lam to the divine address, and Mim to creation. Some even said that the final Mim points to the name Muhammad. These explanations are mostly seen as tasawwuf, spiritual, and ishari readings. In this line we find interpretations from figures like Ibn Arabi. Many Islamic scholars have accepted these interpretations as valid spiritual readings. The fourth view says that these letters are names or markers of surahs. Some scholars said that Alif Lam Mim is a divine sign used to distinguish surahs like Surah Al-Baqarah and Surah Al-Imran. This explanation is practical, but most scholars say it is not enough by itself. The fifth view focuses on language and pronunciation. Reading letters one by one is not normal speech. This alone shows that from the very first verse, the Quran is saying, "I am not an ordinary text." This aspect is studied from the angle of eloquence and rhetoric. Why exactly 14 letters? The Huruf al-Muqatta'at in the Quran are made up of 14 different letters in total. This number is not seen as random. Many classical scholars say this choice is deliberate. First, the language angle. The Arabic alphabet has 28 letters. The disconnected letters are exactly half of that. Many scholars say this points to balance and measure. The Quran is showing that even half of the alphabet is enough to produce a miracle. The message is clear: more is not needed. This point is strongly emphasized by Fakhr al-Din al-Razi. According to him, the Quran makes its challenge using a limited set of letters on purpose. This way, no one can say some letters were missing. Another striking explanation is this: these 14 letters cover most of the sound points in the Arabic language, sounds from the throat, the tongue, and the lips. In other words, almost all basic human sound sources are represented. This means the Quran uses all the possibilities of the human voice and still makes it impossible to produce anything like it. In the Tasawwuf tradition, this number is not taken as a fixed rule, but as a meaningful sign. For example, Ibn Arabi sees these letters as doors opening to different levels of existence. But he clearly says this is an Ishari reading. He does not say this is the only meaning, but rather this is one possible way to read it. Why do some surahs have these letters and others do not? This question has been asked many times. There is no single answer, but there are strong explanations. First, it is important to know this. Most surahs that begin with Huruf al-Muqatta'at also begin by speaking about faith, revelation, the book, the unseen, and the speech of Allah. In other words, these letters usually appear at the beginning of surahs where the question, "What is the Quran?" is central. For example, Surah Al-Baqarah, Surah Al-Imran, Surah Yunus, Surah Hud, Surah Yasin. At the beginning of these surahs, the listener is shaken from the very first word. While expecting a normal address, they suddenly face letters. This creates a pause, a moment of tension, and gathers attention. Al-Zamakhshari says at this point, the Huruf al-Muqatta'at break the listener's habit. In this way, the Quran says from the very start, "Do not listen to me as if I am ordinary speech." So why are they not in every surah? Because the style of the Quran is not one single pattern. Some surahs begin with commands, some with oaths, some with stories. The Huruf al-Muqatta'at are one special doorway of this variety, but not every doorway belongs everywhere. Also, according to many scholars, the Huruf al-Muqatta'at are a test. If they appeared in every surah, this test would become ordinary. Their limited number and specific placement preserve their impact and mystery. So the general understanding is this: the Huruf al-Muqatta'at are used where they are needed for a special purpose. Where they do not appear, there is no lack. There is another wise beginning. An important point in Ibn Arabi's approach is this: he connects the letters themselves to the essence of existence, but he does not present this as a final or binding meaning. For example, he sees Alif as a vertical line and says it can point to oneness. But he immediately gives a warning. He does not say, "This is the meaning of Alif." He says, "Alif can also be seen like this." This difference is very important. Ibn Arabi never uses the language of "this is it" when speaking about the Huruf al-Muqatta'at. He uses expressions like "it points to," "it opens," "it shows." In other words, he makes symbolic readings but does not claim an absolute interpretation. Ibn Arabi also believes that these letters belong to a level of understanding specific to the Prophet. In his words, the Huruf al-Muqatta'at are truths that were opened to the Prophet, but not commanded to be explained to the community. That is why they exist in the Quran, but their explanations are not given. This silence is not a weakness, it is a conscious silence. Al-Qurtubi, on the other hand, takes a balanced position. He reports many of the interpretations about the Huruf al-Muqatta'at, but he strongly emphasizes one thing: these letters are a means of testing. Some people quickly say they are meaningless. Others go to extremes with interpretations. The correct approach is to accept that they carry wisdom, but not to go beyond proper limits. Now let us return to the verses and continue from where we left off. For a person who believes in the unseen and purifies their soul through prayer, a third step becomes unavoidable. Allah completes the unshakable foundation of the believer's character. وَمِمَّا رَزَقْنَاهُمْ يُنْفِقُونَ وَمِمَّا رَزَقْنَاهُمْ يُنْفِقُونَ, and they spend from what we have provided for them. In the date gardens of Medina, the wind was not only shaking the leaves, it was also shaking the idea of ownership. This sentence created a powerful echo in the minds of everyone, from the merchant in the marketplace to the woman sharing a handful of wheat in her home. Because this was not a simple call to help others. It was a deep shift in how existence itself was understood. It was saying, not yours, entrusted to you. The subtle detail in the verse cuts through the desire for ownership with a single strike: what we have provided for them. A person wants full control over what they think they earned with their own effort. They say, "This is mine, I worked for it, I earned it." But revelation steps in and reminds them, the one who gives strength, the one who makes the earth grow, the one who gives intelligence, and the one who brings that wealth into your hands is Allah. You are only a distributor. The society of Medina had to feel this truth deeply, because ahead of them were great tests. Badr, Uhud, Kandak. The city had to be defended, the army had to be equipped, the hungry had to be fed. If the cry of "my wealth" rose, that society would collapse. The word yunfikun means to open a passage, to let something flow out. The believer is meant to be a channel, not a dam. Still water becomes dirty, flowing water gives life. Giving is actually the most concrete test of belief in the unseen. A person who claims to believe in an unseen creator, yet refuses to give from the visible wealth in their hand, exposes the weakness of that claim. Satan whispers into the ear, "If you give, you will have less. If you give, you will become poor." Allah promises the opposite: if you give, you increase. That evening in the streets of Medina, people began to look at their possessions differently. The difference between the gold stored by wealthy Jewish merchants and the dates shared by Muslims was not only a difference of amount, it was a difference of spirit. One searched for safety by storing, the other entered Allah's protection by sharing. After Allah establishes the servant's connection with himself through prayer, the vertical bond, He seals the connection with society through giving, the horizontal bond. The shoulders that stood equal before Allah in prayer now supported one another through giving. And this was not limited to money. Giving knowledge, giving time, giving a smile, whatever you have, taking a piece of it and adding it to the whole. Medina was no longer just a city. It had become a living organism. Every part was programmed to nourish the other. This was the unique fabric of the Madani Quran, taking ideals and bringing them into the streets. But this new society needed one more essential quality. It had to respect not only the revelation given to it now, but also the great chain coming from deep history, because Islam was not a break, it was a powerful continuation. How would the links of that great chain come together in the next verse? And they believe in what has been sent down to you, and in what has been sent down before you, and in the hereafter they are certain, and in what was sent down before you, and in the hereafter they have firm certainty. The spirit of time and the chain of revelation. On that cool, star-filled night in Medina, the voice rising from Masjid an-Nabawi was not speaking only to the Arabian Peninsula. It was embracing the entire ancient memory of humanity. While Allah was shaping the identity of this new community, He did not make them a rootless people. Instead, He connected them to the most noble chain in human history. They believe in what was revealed before and in what is being revealed now. This verse had a strong effect on the social fabric of Medina. Think about it. On one side were the people of the book, proud of the Torah and the gospel in their hands. They saw Muslims as unlettered desert people with no deep revelation tradition. On the other side, Muslims could have become a group focused only on what was revealed to them. But the Quran did not allow this narrow view. When defining the believer, the Quran demanded a deep intellectual and spiritual openness. A Muslim could not limit faith only to what was revealed to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. A Muslim had to believe in the coolness of the fire for Ibrahim, in the staff of Musa that split the sea, and in the breath of Isa that gave life, peace be upon them. This was a clear declaration. Islam is not a new religion. It is the final link of an eternal truth. A believer in Medina could feel themselves in the same ship as Nuh, in the same well as Yusuf, and in the same greatness as Sulaiman. This awareness lifted the Muslim out of narrow tribal thinking and made them an heir to a universal history. The Ahbar of Medina, the scholars stained with ink, had turned their books into objects of ownership. To them, truth belonged only to their hands. The Quran shattered this claim. Allah rejected dividing revelation into competing truths. He reminded them that all revelation comes from the same source, from the same teacher, Allah. The condition, believing in what was sent down before you, gave Muslims a deep sense of respect and inclusiveness. It also became the spiritual foundation of the famous Constitution of Medina that would later be formed with Jews and Christians. The Muslim no longer looked at the other as a complete outsider. Instead, they saw them as someone who was once addressed by the same truth, even if that truth was later changed. And with this verse, the Quran placed the Muslim firmly inside the long, unbroken story of divine guidance. From today's perspective, this verse carries a very strong message, especially for our brothers and sisters who live in non-Muslim countries and share daily life with Jewish and Christian communities. It opens the doors of tolerance and dialogue wide open, because our source is the same. Distortions may have happened throughout history, but one thing should never be forgotten. The return to the essence is a promise made directly by Allah. The Quran never addressed them simply as disbelievers. Instead, it gave them a distinct position by calling them al-Kitab, people of the book. Because of this, we, in Europe, America, Africa, and in lands where Christians live in large numbers, must keep communication alive with them and see our roots as close to one another. We should meet on shared values and, just like the peace established in Medina, work together today for world peace. We must build an alliance of civilizations, not a clash of civilizations. Against external threats and dangers, we can stand together and take a shared position. This has happened in history, and today, based on verses and hadiths, we say clearly, it can and will happen again. Allah is not calling Islamic civilization to war with Christian and Jewish civilizations, but to peace and harmony. Of course, this is not unconditional. It must be built on agreeing upon basic universal human rights and freedoms and reaching a balanced model like the one established in Medina, based on shared human values. And this wide historical vision had to be tied to one final point. Otherwise, it would remain only historical awareness. The verse ends with a striking conclusion, and in the hereafter, they are certain, they have absolute certainty. This is the breaking point of the story. The word "they believe" is replaced here with something stronger. They know with certainty, without doubt. Why? Because the hereafter is not a theory or a philosophical possibility. For the believer, the hereafter is more real than the ground under their feet and the air they breathe. This was the secret behind how that small group in Medina could challenge the world's great empires. A person who is certain, at the level of yaqeen, that they will die and be held accountable, cannot be bought with gold, nor frightened by death. Yaqeen means knowing something as if you see it with your own eyes. The strength behind the hand that held the scale honestly in the markets of Medina was that it saw the divine balance. The strength behind the knees that rose at night for prayer was that they smelled paradise. By bringing together these 5 qualities, belief in the unseen, prayer, giving, belief in previous revelations and certainty in the hereafter, Allah defined the complete human of the new world. Once this character was built, victory became inevitable. So what was the great outcome waiting for those who carried these qualities? And how deep was the darkness of those who stayed outside this path? Now, let us move on to verse 5. Ulaika ala huda min rabbihim wa ulaika hum al-muflihun. Those are upon guidance from their Lord, and those are the ones who are successful. On that misty morning in Medina, just before dawn, the verses echoing in Masjid an-Nabawi made the crossroads clear. After listing those 5 unshakable qualities, belief in the unseen, prayer, giving, the chain of revelation, and certainty in the hereafter, like beads on a string, Allah announced the result of this great character-building process. Only they are on true guidance from their Lord, and only they are the ones who attain success. Every word in this sentence rose like a victory anthem. In the deep beauty of Arabic, the particle Allah means being on top of something, standing firmly on a mount. Allah does not simply say, they are guided. Their guidance is like a strong ride beneath them. The storms of life, the sound of swords at Badr, or the temptations of the markets of Medina cannot throw them off. They are on guidance. Their direction is clear, their speed is steady, and control is in their hands. And this guidance comes from Rabbihim, their Lord. This word whispers belonging and protection. They are not abandoned. With every step, they are under the care of the owner of the universe. So who are the successful ones? The word comes from falah, which means a farmer breaking the soil. Think of a seed under the dark earth, crushed by heavy weight, but with the life inside it, the seed breaks its shell, splits the soil, and reaches the light. That is success. A person crushed under the weight of the world, the chains of the ego, and the whispers of Satan. When they hold on to these 5 qualities, they rise like that seed. Saying they are saved is not enough. They break their chains and reach the highest level of existence, freedom and lasting success. Those humble people walking in the dusty streets of Medina were confirmed as true heroes of falah. But the brighter the light, the deeper the shadow. The rhythm of Surah Al-Baqarah suddenly changes. The atmosphere becomes heavy. The words turn into a warning cry. From the bright face of guidance, we hit the deep darkness, the walls of denial. There were signs in the Torah and the Gospel about the coming of the Prophet, but people did not want to see. Some did not see because they did not read. Some did not see because they did not understand. Some saw but refused to accept. Some of the Jewish scholars in Medina recognized the Prophet. His qualities were written in their books, but most of them denied him. Why? He is not Jewish. He is Arab. How can he be a prophet? Allah says in the Quran, they recognize him as they recognize their own children. Yet some of them knowingly hide the truth, as they recognize their own children. What a powerful expression. Meaning, when they saw the Prophet, they said among themselves, this is him. But in public, they denied him. Why? Pride, jealousy, worldly benefit. If we accept him, what will happen to our position? What will our knowledge be worth? People will listen to him, not to us. But some were different. Abdullah ibn Salam radiallahu anh was one of the greatest rabbis of Medina. When the Prophet arrived in Medina, he went to see him. He said, when I looked at him, I knew this was not the face of a liar. And he became Muslim. Some from his family and community also became Muslim, but most did not. What does this mean today? A Muslim loves Musa, loves Ibrahim, loves Isa, loves all the prophets. A Muslim does not say, my prophet is the best. A Muslim says, all prophets are messengers of Allah. I respect all of them. A Jew honors Musa, rejects Isa, and denies Muhammad. A Christian honors Isa, accepts Musa but does not fully follow him, and denies Muhammad. A Muslim believes in all of them, loves all of them, accepts all of them, and Allah's invitation is still open, come to a common word. Now let us come to verse 6. Indeed, for those who insist on denial, it makes no difference whether you warn them or do not warn them, they will not believe. This verse opens the curtain on a tragedy. The people mentioned here are not those who have never heard the truth. They are those who saw it, heard it, understood it, and then covered it on purpose. The word kafir comes from a root that is also used for a farmer who covers a seed with soil. The truth is, like the sun standing high in the sky, but this is the stubbornness of a man who closes his eyes and says, "There is no sun." After the description of the Muttaqin, now comes the opposite group, those who deny. At first glance, this verse sounds very harsh, but in reality it carries deep wisdom. A kafir is someone who hides the truth, someone who sees the signs of Allah but chooses to ignore them, someone who covers the natural purity, fitrah, inside their heart. The Prophet said, "Every child is born upon fitrah, then their parents make them Jewish, Christian or otherwise." So faith is the original state. Denial is a cover that comes later. That is why the word kafir is used, because the person has covered their own fitrah. But notice something very important. Which disbelievers is Allah talking about? Is it all disbelievers? No. It is a specific group, a group that has reached a point where there is no return. This verse is not about every person who disbelieves. It is only about a certain group, and who they are, only Allah truly knows. We can never say about anyone, "This person is a kafir and will never become Muslim." If that were allowed, the Prophet would not have gone to Abu Jahl's door again and again. Then comes one of the most chilling scenes in the Quran. Verse 7. ختم الله على قلوبهم وعلى سمعهم وعلى أبصارهم غشاوة ولهم عذاب عظيم. Allah has sealed their hearts and their hearing, and over their eyes is a covering, and for them is a great punishment. Imagine this, a city whose gates are locked from the inside, and then heavy seals are placed on them from the outside. No light can enter, no sound can pass through. This is not a cruel action from Allah. It is the natural result of a person's own choices. A heart that ignores thousands of warnings, calls every miracle magic, and silences its conscience again and again, eventually loses its softness. It hardens. It turns to stone. Allah seals their hearts and their hearing and places a veil over their eyes. They become so blind that they cannot even see that they are standing at the edge of a cliff. Living in Medina, in the very center of revelation, and still walking around with this seal, could there be a greater tragedy? This description is for some people who heard the Quran, understood it, were warned many times, saw proofs, saw miracles, yet still chose denial with their hearts. The true knowledge belongs to Allah. For this group, Allah says, warning them or not warning them makes no difference. Why? Because they have already decided. They sealed their own hearts. They closed themselves to the truth. This is not injustice from Allah. This is the result of their own choice. Allah shows the path. Allah gives signs. Allah sends prophets. But the final decision belongs to the human being. If a person says yes, Allah opens the doors. If a person says no and insists, Allah leaves them to what they chose. Allah did not force them to disbelieve. They chose it themselves. Allah only sealed that choice. The line between light and darkness is now clearly drawn. But in Medina, there was a third group. They were not fully in the light and not fully in the darkness. They were hiding in the shadows, the most dangerous and most complex group of all, the hypocrites, munafiqun. The story now moves to the most tense pages of Medina, to the faces behind the masks. The atmosphere of Medina suddenly became heavy. The voice echoing between the columns of Masjid an-Nabawi was no longer only comforting the hearts of believers or describing the stubbornness of disbelievers. This time, it was exposing a group that stood in the shadows, neither fully in the light nor fully in darkness. The Quran was beginning one of the deepest psychological analyses in history. The hypocrites, munafiqin. For believers, only 5 verses were revealed. For disbelievers, only 2 verses. But for this masked group, a shocking analysis stretching over 13 verses began. And among the people, there are those who say, "We believe in Allah and in the day of judgment," and they are not believers. People are some who say, "We believe in Allah and the last day," but they are not believers. Imagine the marketplace of Medina. A man stands in the front row during prayer. His voice may be louder than everyone else's, but his eyes keep scanning the crowd, and his heart works like a calculator. Is it profitable to stay with this group? What if the people of Makkah win? What if Muhammad loses? These people did not see faith as surrender. They saw it as an insurance policy. They built a fortress with their words, but they never stepped inside it. Allah destroyed this false claim with a single strike. They are not believers. This was a divine exposure. The mask fell with the very first sentence, trying to deceive Allah. Then comes verse 9, describing this tragic and almost absurd attempt. يُخَادِعُونَ اللَّهَ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَمَا يَخْدَعُونَ إِلَّا أَنفُسَهُمْ وَمَا يَشْعُرُونَ يُخَادِعُونَ اللَّهَ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَمَا يَخْدَعُونَ إِلَّا أَنفُسَهُمْ وَمَا يَشْعُرُونَ. They try to deceive Allah and those who believe, but they deceive only themselves, and they do not realize it. Now the scene truly darkens. The Quran described the believers briefly. It described the disbelievers even more briefly. But when it comes to this third group, it stops. It slows down. It goes into detail. Why? Because this group is the most dangerous. They are not clearly outside. They are not standing at the door. They appear to be inside. When the first verse describing them was revealed, it was as if ice fell over Medina. Because these people were not polytheists, they were not Jews or Christians. These were people who said they were Muslims. But the Quran makes one thing very clear. It does not look at words. It looks at the heart. These people had done the following. They learned the language of faith. They copied the behavior of believers. They memorized the correct sentences, but their hearts never changed direction. And this is where the Quran begins to uncover them, layer by layer. It was like a small child who closes his eyes and thinks no one can see him. The hypocrites thought they could deceive the owner of the universe. Trying to deceive Allah is as absurd as trying to hide the ocean with a glass. But the real tragedy was this. They were only deceiving themselves. They were trapped inside their own lies, falling into the traps they had set. They did not even realize it. Like a cancer cell, while trying to destroy the body they lived in, they were actually destroying their own source of life. Why were they doing this? The answer was simple. In their hearts is a disease. This was a disease of doubt and hypocrisy, spreading like a virus, and Allah increased this disease, because every lie gives birth to another lie, and every fake position makes the heart darker. In the tense atmosphere of Medina, the whispers of the hypocrites' leader, Abdullah ibn Ubay, echoed in the dark corners. A painful punishment was prepared for them. Why? Not only because they did not believe, but because they lied. Abdullah ibn Ubay's plan failed. He did not become king. He did not gain power. So what did he do? He could not openly oppose the Muslims because most of the people had already become Muslim. So he chose another way. He said he was Muslim, but inside he kept his hatred alive. This is the root of hypocrisy, loss of status, loss of power, loss of personal benefit. He comes to the mosque. He says, "Alhamdulillah, I am Muslim." He prays, he fasts, he gives charity sometimes. But why does he do it? For Allah? No, for show, so people will not suspect him. In another place in the Quran, Allah says about the hypocrites, when they stand for prayer, they stand lazily. They show themselves to people, and they remember Allah very little. So they pray. But how do they pray? Without desire, without heart, out of obligation. Why do they pray? For Allah? No. So people will see them. This is the difference of the hypocrite. Outwardly a believer, inwardly not. The Islamic community was built on honesty. Those who placed the explosive of lies at the foundation of this building face the strongest warning. This is not ignorance. This is not lack of knowledge. This is not even simple doubt. This is wanting to play on both sides. In Medina, this was very common. On one side, the Muslims were growing stronger. On the other side, Makkah was still a threat. There were Jews, political balances, and power struggles. Some people thought, let's wait. Whoever has power, we will stand with them. Let's keep every door open. This is where hypocrisy is born. Hypocrisy is not only a belief problem, it is first a character problem. That is why the Quran describes this group in the longest way, because they do not harm only themselves. They slowly rot the society from the inside. Then the Quran brings a very striking metaphor. Their example is like one who lights a fire. Imagine the scene. A dark desert, a group of people lost. Someone lights a fire, the fire burns, everything becomes visible, everyone feels safe. And then, suddenly the fire goes out, and the darkness falls, heavier than before. The Quran says, this is how these people are. They experience a moment of light, a moment of closeness, a moment of security. Then they pull back, and the darkness becomes even deeper. Here the Quran touches a very subtle point. Touching faith, but not surrendering, can darken a person even more, because now they can no longer say, I did not know. And the Quran describes them like this. They are deaf, mute, and blind. But again, this is not physical. It is a chosen blindness. They do not hear what they do not want to hear. They do not say what they should say. They do not see what they should see. Then comes the most striking sentence. They do not return. This is not a declaration of fate. It is a description of a condition. They do not return because they do not want to return. Here, the Quran teaches something very important. The most dangerous person is not the open disbeliever. The most dangerous person is the one who refuses to face themselves. And now, the opening scene of Surah Al-Baqarah is complete. 3 groups, 3 attitudes, 3 paths of destiny. When they are told, do not spread corruption on the earth, their answer is the same defense we still hear today. We are only reformers. We are fixing things. These men who fueled conflict, spread chaos, and played with the nerves of society, presented themselves as peacemakers and modernizers. And Allah placed the final point. No, they are the corruptors themselves, but they do not realize it. On that night in Medina, the curtains were lifting one by one. The sly smiles of the hypocrites froze in front of the sharp verses of the Quran. But the story was not over. The real tragedy of the hypocrites would deepen when they began to call the believers foolish. So who was the real fool? In the shadowed streets of Medina, the whispers of the hypocrites had turned into open arrogance. Seeing themselves as the intellectual elite, strategy experts, and balanced politicians, this group looked down on the pure, sincere, and self-sacrificing believers around Muhammad, peace be upon him, with mockery. Revelation exposed this arrogant attitude spoken behind closed doors. وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ أَمِنُوا كَمَا آمَنَ النَّاسُ قَالُوا أَنُؤْمِنُ كَمَا آمَنَ السُّفَهَاءُ أَلَا إِنَّهُمْ هُمُ السُّفَهَاءُ ولكن لا يعلمون وإذا قيل لهم آمنوا كما آمن الناس قالوا أنؤمن كما آمن السفهاء ألا إنهم هم السفهاء ولكن لا يعلمون. When they are told, believe as the believers have believed, they say, shall we believe like these foolish people? Know well, they are the foolish ones, but they do not know it. In the eyes of the hypocrites, Abu Bakr's loyalty, Bilal's resistance, and Ammar's surrender were examples of stupidity. To them, leaving property in Makkah and migrating to Medina was not logical. They thought, why risk everything? Why cut ties with the powerful Quraysh? They called their selfish thinking reason, and they called faith that pays a price foolishness. Allah crushed this pride with one sentence: know well, the foolish ones are themselves, but they do not know. True reason is not what saves only today, it is what builds eternity. Who is wiser, the one who sees the ship sinking but stays in the luxury cabin, or the one who jumps into the lifeboat despite the storm? By choosing the temporary over the lasting, the hypocrites made one of the greatest mistakes in history. The Quran continues to describe their most dangerous game. وَإِذَا لَقُوا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا قَالُوا آمَنَّا وَإِذَا خَلَوْا إِلَى شَيَاطِينِهِمْ قَالُوا إِنَّا مَعَكُمْ إِنَّمَا نَحْنُ مُسْتَهْزِئُونَ وَإِذَا لَقُوا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا قَالُوا آمَنَّا وَإِذَا خَلَوْا إِلَى شَيَاطِينِهِمْ قَالُوا إِنَّا مَعَكُمْ إِنَّمَا نَحْنُ مُسْتَهْزِئُونَ. When they meet the believers, they say, we believe. But when they are alone with their devils, they say, we are with you, we are only mocking them. In the mosque, they shake the believers' hands and say, we are with you. But their real stage is at night, in hidden corners of Medina, or inside their tribal fortresses, where they speak very differently. The hypocrite is a spiritual refugee, trying to benefit from both sides, but belonging to neither. Allah's response to their mockery is shocking. Allah mocks them. What had they done? Allah explains it with a powerful trade image. They are the ones who bought misguidance in exchange for guidance. They had guidance as capital, but they chose the worst product, misguidance. And the result? Their trade did not profit. For the merchants of Medina, this image was very clear. These people were bankrupt traders who lost not only their faith, but also their peace and their future. Then the Quran draws a cinematic scene. A man lights a fire in the darkness, the light of faith. Everything becomes visible. Just as he is about to warm himself and see the path, Allah takes away the light and leaves him in deep darkness. They are deaf, mute, and blind. They will not return. Then comes a second scene. Heavy rain pouring down, lightning flashing in the sky, thunder shaking the bones. The hypocrite, afraid of death, puts his fingers in his ears. Each time lightning flashes, a truth appears through revelation. He takes a few steps. When darkness returns, he freezes in place. In Medina, lightning was flashing. Revelation was exposing the real faces behind the masks. The hypocrites were afraid. The believers were walking toward certainty. But Allah's address would not stop here. After all this analysis, a great call to all humanity would come. Worship your Lord who created you. But why would this call be crowned with the example of a mosquito? We have reached the end of this video. If this video reaches 20,000 likes, inshallah we promise to continue with Surah Al-Baqarah. If you show interest, more of our brothers and sisters can benefit from this tafsir. Our goal is simply to help this video reach more people.